Different things like that, like things you would never think of. Crazy stuff. We said yes a lot to mostly everything and everywhere.
They were more than bandmates. They were brothers in boots, riding the wild wave of fame from Jersey dive bars to global domination.
I've never done it for that long. I've been the lead singer, but I never tried it. I still take lessons.
But somewhere between the platinum records and sold-out tours, something broke. And Richie Sambora? He's finally breaking his silence. For years, he kept it quiet. Until now. What really happened behind the glam, the grins, and the guitar solos? What did Jon Bon Jovi not say when Richie walked away? And why is one of rock's most iconic duos now a story of distance instead of reunion? This isn't just about ego or fame. It's about something far more personal. And once you hear what Richie reveals, you'll never hear those classic hits the same way again. Brothers in Jersey rock. Long before the limelight, Richie Sambora and Jon Bon Jovi were two driven musicians grinding it out in New Jersey's local rock scene. Hailing from the working-class towns of Woodbridge and Sayreville, respectively, both were molded by the grit and tenacity of their hometowns. Their early music ventures, Jon with the Wild Ones and Richie with bands like Message, saw them playing tiny clubs, VFW halls, and backyard gigs, chasing a dream that few believed could come true. What brought them together was more than just ambition. It was a shared reverence for musical storytellers like Bruce Springsteen and blues-driven showmen like Led Zeppelin. When Sambora officially joined Bon Jovi in 1983, it was a pivotal moment for the newly signed band. His arrival didn't just fill a guitar slot, it elevated the entire sound. His bluesy, emotionally charged playing and natural chemistry with Jon helped sculpt the anthemic heartland rock sound that would define the band. In those early performances at clubs like the Fast Lane in Asbury Park, their synergy was unmistakable. Richie's instinct for arrangement and harmony perfectly complemented Jon's bold, radio-friendly vocals, creating a sound that felt both massive and personal. Their partnership turned out to be very effective in the songs that were composed and linked across generations. Peak, Sambora's talk box solo on "Livin' on a Prayer," the brooding riffs of "Wanted Dead or Alive," and the heart-rending sincerity of "I'll Be There for You," all of which are painstakingly crafted to become part of that distinctive Bon Jovi sound. The band was as close offstage, with images of giggly faces in backstage corridors, brotherly energy on tour. All became a portrait of two people closely bonded through trust and shared struggle. The reality of picture perfects, all characterized by Richie being the earthen release valve of Jon from all the madness that comes with fame. But in that bond, a silent hierarchy was already forming. So much so that even while they were at their most united, Jon was already being positioned, designed, or defaulted as the face of the brand. Richie stood just out of the spotlight center on most occasions, despite co-writing quite a few of the band's hits and serving up some of their most memorable sonic moments. Still committed to the vision they built together, his early years weren't all about music. It was about two Jersey boys tapping into a once-in-a-lifetime rhythm that took them from little neighborhood garages to global stages. But as their bond deepened, something even more powerful was quietly taking shape behind the music. The soul behind the strings. As Bon Jovi's signature sound took shape in the mid-1980s, Richie Sambora wasn't just playing guitar. He was defining the sonic personality of the band. His tone, phrasing, and melodic instinct provided a contrast to the glam metal trends of the time, grounding the band in something more soulful and enduring. Sambora's style fused blues-based emotion with arena rock confidence, producing solos and rhythms that carried as much emotional weight as the lyrics themselves. His work on stage and in the studio was never about technical flair alone. It was about storytelling, each solo a narrative arc that expanded the song's meaning. At the peak of their creative synergy, albums like Slippery When Wet and New Jersey became masterclasses in radio-friendly rock with depth. While Jon Bon Jovi delivered vocal power and pop accessibility, Sambora's fingerprints were all over the arrangements, giving the songs warmth, edge, and that unteachable sense of feel. Tracks like Never Say Goodbye and I'll Be There For You showcased his ability to build emotional resonance into guitar lines, while his harmonies elevated every chorus into anthemic territory. Richie wasn't simply accompanying, he was completing the emotional architecture of their biggest hits. Sambora's uniqueness did not just stem from his skill, but from his restraint and intuition. He knew when to hold on for silence and when to let a solo rip, when to harmonize behind Jon's voice, and when to allow his guitar to shriek. This balance became an important trademark of Bon Jovi's most recognizable songs, with his contributions to mood and texture surpassing any gaudy production. Sambora brought nuance to a band often stereotyped for image over substance. The music would have a heart beneath all the image trappings. While critics and musicians alike recognize Sambora as the unsung architect of Bon Jovi's emotional core, history has often elevated Jon Bon Jovi as the front man. The talk box solo in Livin' on a Prayer became a symbol for a band that could marry showmanship with substance. Sambora's guitar work continues to electrify Bon Jovi's best-loved tunes, a reminder that behind every powerhouse singer stands another respectably capable guitarist who knows a thing or two about communicating with string. Tensions behind the hits. As Bon Jovi became one of the biggest bands in the world, cracks began to show beneath the surface glamour. From the late 80s into the early 2000s, Jon Bon Jovi's rise as the face of the band became more than just a branding strategy. It shifted the entire internal structure. Richie Sambora, once a driving creative force and equal collaborator, began to feel sidelined in major decisions about the band's direction, image, and legacy. This shift wasn't immediate or dramatic, but rather a gradual erosion of influence that left Sambora in a role he hadn't signed up for: background support in a project he helped build from the ground up. The imbalance became especially pronounced as the pressures of constant touring and producing hit records mounted. The pace was relentless, leaving little room for collaboration or emotional recalibration. Sambora, who had once been deeply involved in shaping the band's musical vision, started to feel like his input had less weight. As he later shared, being physically present in rehearsals and recording sessions didn't always equate to having a voice. There was a growing disconnect between what the band looked like on stage, a unified juggernaut, and how fractured it felt behind closed doors. It was only made worse by the personal tribulations Sambora had to go through, such as struggles with addiction and the emotional impact of his divorce. He became vulnerable and searched for stability. Yet, the environment did not offer any comfort any longer in this group. The thing that hurt the most was not what other people said or did. In the eyes of his closest companions, he just felt as if he floated through life, indifferent. When he did speak about various problems or ideas, he still ended up feeling either rejected or outnumbered. The bond, once thick with a sense of success, was replaced with an insular hierarchy, as Sambora would later explain, where his place did not feel very secure anymore. Unlike other partnerships that would have erupted with public headlines, fiery interviews, and other actions that would seek to publicize a divorce, this simply dissolved in silence. For many years, Sambora would continue playing the role, crisscrossing the world on tour, recording, or appearing as part of the group. However, by then, he had emotionally started to drift away. By the time he left the band in 2013, the final severing wasn't just one specific instant, it was the culmination, drawing upon years of trying to negotiate healthy territory within an environment that no longer really felt collaborative or safe. The pressure was not explosive, but corrosive, and it quietly unraveled one of rock's most iconic creative bonds. The 2013 disappearance. In April 2013, just hours before a Bon Jovi show in Calgary, fans were blindsided by the sudden announcement: Richie Sambora would not be performing. The official statement cited personal reasons, but offered no timeline or explanation, leaving speculation to spiral. As one of the most visible and beloved members of the band, Sambora's abrupt exit sparked confusion and concern among fans worldwide. Initially, many assumed it was a temporary break, perhaps due to health or family matters. But as weeks turned into months without his return, it became clear that something deeper was unraveling behind the scenes. Privately, Sambora was reaching a breaking point. Years of relentless touring, creative disputes, and mounting frustration over being sidelined had culminated in emotional and physical burnout. In interviews since, including a 2024 New York Post feature, Sambora described the environment as toxic, noting that the band had become more of a business than a brotherhood. He said he felt unheard, creatively restricted, and spiritually depleted. More importantly, he cited his daughter, Ava, as a major reason for stepping away. He wanted to be present in her life, something the band's non-stop schedule didn't allow. It was such an excruciating experience that it proved even more traumatic than what had occurred to bring about the statement. Sambora claims he did not hear things directly, but found out that Bon Jovi went on tour without him and then learned that the band had hired Phil X in his place through the internet. And that sucker punched him gut-wise. After a lifetime of loyalty and contribution, Sambora did not feel just pushed out, but erased, without even the courtesy of a conversation. In his own words, "It was like I disappeared and nobody even called." It was a jolt of absence quite out of place in fans' minds, not just because of the brilliant fingerwork over harmonies, but mostly because Sambora was the soul and heart behind the band's music. For now, Richie finally began to tell his side of the story after all this time, even through the hushed silence of Bon Jovi. It wasn't just one spat of hers that drove her out. It was the years of feeling creatively and personally undervalued. His apology and public remarks of 2024 make that aspect clear. That disappearing drama had to do with self-preservation, family, and finally leaving a place that no longer felt like home. Family. Over fame. In the aftermath of Richie Sambora's unexpected exit from Bon Jovi's 2013 Because We Can tour, one of the most personal and compelling reasons behind his decision gradually came to light: his daughter, Ava. In multiple interviews, including his 2024 apology featured in Yahoo and the New York Post, Sambora explained that stepping away from the band was less about conflict and more about prioritizing his role as a father. Ava, whom he shares with actress Heather Locklear, was entering her teenage years, and Sambora recognized that his constant touring was creating a void in their relationship. "You don't get those years back," he said, "and I didn't want to be a ghost in her life." For Sambora, the pressure of balancing fatherhood with the demands of an international touring schedule had become unsustainable. He admitted that while music had given him everything — fame, fortune, legacy — it had also taken a toll on his personal life. With Ava at a formative age and going through her challenges, including her parents' high-profile divorce, Richie knew that showing up wasn't just a choice. It was a necessity. "I didn't want her to grow up without me being there," he explained. "Being a rock star didn't mean anything if I couldn't be a good dad." There was a difficult, mixed reaction from fans. Some blasted Sambora for abandoning the tour, decrying professionals and traitors. Others lauded his decision, arguing that it was brave and human to recognize the sacrifices made by musicians behind the scenes. In hindsight, his definition of walking out isn't as impulsive as supposed. Rather, it is deeply considered personal accountability. A decade later, according to Sambora, his choice was not about leaving music. It was about refusing to abandon his daughter. However, today, according to Sambora, the greatest legacy won't be found on stage. Rather, it will be with the relationship he forged with Ava. In his posts, he brags about how proud he is of having raised her, not only well-educated and creative, but also very close. His leaving the Bon Jovi family shocked fans and altered the course of the band, but Richie never looked back with regret about placing family first. "I can play guitar forever, but I only get one chance to be her dad," he blurted out. The goodbye may have been personal, but what followed spoke volumes without a word. Media silence. Private fallout. Following Richie Sambora's abrupt departure from Bon Jovi in 2013, both he and Jon Bon Jovi maintained a notable silence. There were no heated interviews, no dramatic public feuds, and no official explanation beyond vague references to personal reasons. Yet, the lack of words said plenty. According to insiders and longtime observers, the friendship and professional bond between Richie and Jon had already begun to fracture well before the tour. While the band continued to operate publicly as a polished unit, privately, the tension had reached a breaking point. Creative differences, personal disconnection, and growing resentment simmered beneath the surface. One of the most telling signs of the divide was how decision-making evolved within the band. Sambora, once a key contributor to the group's creative process, was being excluded from major discussions. In interviews, he later revealed that toward the end, he felt like a hired gun rather than a founding member. Studio sessions had reportedly become colder, more transactional, and less collaborative. According to his 2024 interview in Yahoo Entertainment, Sambora had reached a point where he no longer felt heard or valued. It stopped feeling like a band, and more like a corporation. Sambora somehow managed to persist in being outwardly silent against Jon or the band for several years, despite the growing frustration within him. He would allude to the emotional scar it left on him much later. In recent interviews, only then was he able to describe the situation as being emotionally and creatively draining, stating he felt that the environment had turned toxic. The silent rift was not a dramatic explosion, but rather a gradual, poisoned erosion of trust and warmth. In a way, that silence must have been even more painful. No closure, just a void. Meanwhile, Jon Bon Jovi has mostly restrained his comments regarding Richie. Over the years, he commented on the difficulty of Sambora's departure, but never elaborated. He was more concerned about moving the band forward with new guitarist Phil X rather than dwelling on past conflicts. The allowance of mutual avoidance of public drama spared the dignity of the band's heritage from being compromised, but it also meant that for the next decade, fans kept wondering how one of rock's most historic pairings could meet in such an extremely profound silence. The apology that took a decade. In 2024, over a decade after walking away from Bon Jovi, Richie Sambora finally opened up about his departure in a rare and emotional interview. Speaking candidly to Yahoo Entertainment and the New York Post, Sambora offered a heartfelt apology, not only to the fans who had supported him through decades of music, but also directly to Jon Bon Jovi. "I just disappeared, man. I ghosted," he admitted. For the first time, he publicly acknowledged the abruptness of his exit and the confusion it left behind. He expressed regret for how he handled the situation, saying, "I probably should have talked to Jon. I should have explained it better." While taking accountability, Sambora also revealed that his decision wasn't made in isolation or out of ego. It came from years of emotional buildup. He described feeling creatively stifled and increasingly sidelined, saying, "I felt like I wasn't heard anymore." The rift, he explained, wasn't about one argument, but the culmination of unresolved frustrations. He felt his role in the band had shifted from equal collaborator to background player, even though he had co-written many of Bon Jovi's biggest hits. His decision to leave wasn't meant to burn bridges. It was, in his words, a step toward saving his sanity. The apology marked an important change concerning how fans and even industry colleagues viewed Sambora's exit. For many years, the rumors about some internal tension kept swirling around, but neither side was willing to go into detail about it. In making this public statement, he lent a human dimension to his decision while finally granting some clarity. While he stated that he stood by the choice of family and mental health, he regretted the pain and confusion it caused. His reflections became particularly poignant as he laid bare the moment he realized he had left a lot of people in the dark. And this vulnerability struck a chord among longtime fans. The only clear answer from Bon Jovi specifically concerning the apology would be that he has not done so publicly. He has kept his interviews professional, claiming that a reunion is not realistic, though there is no animosity. Nevertheless, it opened the door for contemplation and healing for SHR, if not reconciliation. Sambora gave closure to a book that had long been left unfinished when he honored both his missteps and the larger issues that contributed to his leaving. Graceful goodbye. Richie Sambora's public apology in 2024 opened a door many fans had long hoped to see cracked open, the possibility of a reunion with Jon Bon Jovi. Yet Jon's response was more contemplative than enthusiastic. While he expressed appreciation for Sambora's sentiment and acknowledged their history with sincerity, he was also firm in his direction. There was no bitterness in his voice, just clarity. "We had our run," he told the Sunday Times, a statement that captured the quiet finality of a partnership that had simply outlived its rhythm. It wasn't about anger or blame. It was about evolution. In recent years, Jon has been in the midst of his own transformation. Following a serious health scare involving atrophied vocal cords, he has been candid about the difficulty of returning to performance. His recovery has been slow and meticulous, marked by surgery, silence, and the sobering realization that his voice, the very tool that carried him to global stardom, might never return to full strength. This physical challenge has reshaped how Jon sees the future of the band. There's less bravado now and more thoughtfulness. He's no longer chasing the past. He's simply trying to sustain what still matters. The evolution now extends far beyond the stage. Jon has quite evidently shifted to a more introspective approach, one encouraged by the tone of Forever, 2024. A mature chronicle of loss, the costs of emotions, and, in general, being in rock and roll for too long. Whereas Jon's present focus is refinement, in terms of the past, the thought of a Sambora reunion may be somewhat appealing to the hearts of the fans, whereas for Jon, it could interfere with the balance he's worked so hard to reclaim. Nostalgia seems to have little interest for him these days. That's secondary for him. There's nothing greater for him today than being in the now. Ultimately, Jon Bon Jovi closing the chapter on Sambora is not about disavowing the past. Instead, It is honoring the past while not being tied to it. When asked, he's typically complimentary about Richie and has never voiced any hostility. But he's focused on Bon Jovi as it exists today, right now, with new music and new limitations. It's a kind and measured goodbye, not because he doesn't care, but because he finally understands where he stands. Jon Bon Jovi's current mindset is indicative of a trend among veteran artists who no longer feel the need to redefine their legacy through reunions, but instead through reinvention and boundary setting. In an era rife with social media nostalgia and reunion culture, from Friends specials to giant band comebacks, it seems harsher than ever for an icon to fly back for sentiment's sake. But Jon's restraint is a different strength, his knowing when not to visit one place or another in his history. "I'm not interested in being a tribute act to myself," he said in a 2023 interview. Would a reunion even work? To the outside world, a Bon Jovi-Sambora reunion feels like a rock fairy tale waiting to be written. Two old friends, back on stage, rekindling the magic that once moved millions. But the reality behind that romantic idea is far more complicated. Time has changed everything, musically, emotionally, and practically. More than a decade has passed since Sambora left the band, and in that time, both artists have gone in completely different directions. What worked in 1986 doesn't necessarily work in 2024, and both men seem to understand that, even if fans don't want to. Sambora has spent recent years immersed in solo projects and fatherhood, carving out a life defined by balance rather than burnout. His music now leans toward blues, soul, and introspection, a far cry from the anthemic, high-gloss sound of Bon Jovi's peak. Jon, meanwhile, has steered the band toward a more adult contemporary style, moving away from the hair metal bombast of the past. Their creative goals no longer align, and forcing them together for the sake of legacy risks flattening the authenticity both have worked hard to preserve. Health is another big deal. Jon's vocal recovery has not left him much to work with physically, and a high-octane reunion show, as in the old days, would not just be exhausting, but perhaps damaging. Sambora, too, says he has become more discerning by not taking performance opportunities that are not good for his personal health or long-term well-being because of the strenuousness of the tour. Even if one could deal with logistics, chemistry remains an issue. Decades of emotional baggage do not just disappear with a handshake and a sound check. Establishing that kind of trust takes more than just nostalgia. It requires a labor neither side appears eager to do. Even if it were going to be repaired, such an eventuality may end up hurting the very legacy such a reunion would celebrate. The power of Bon Jovi's tale lies in what they did together in that prime time, and not in trying to resurrect for the sake of reminiscence. Since then, Jon and Richie have carved out new lives for themselves, and a reunion may serve the fans more than the musicians themselves. For now, that dream remains just that, an idea that, whilst exciting, has little traction in the realities of where these men are today. Sometimes, the myth of a reunion is stronger than what the real thing would ever be. Long ago, veterans in the music industry warned against reunions based on little else than sentimental motivations of fans, and Bon Jovi is not an exception. Producer Bob Rock noted in a 2023 Rolling Stone panel discussion on legacy acts that some reunions work because there's something new to say. Others collapse under the weight of what they used to be. Ironically, it carries all the more relevance for Bon Jovi, the cultural credentials of which were once cemented at a very specific time in history. Audiences tend to want the emotional time capsule instead of those real aging people behind it. So, it is not just logistical and personal, it is psychological as well. The version of the band that most fans romanticized falls in the years of prime MTV and arena anthems, but bringing that cast back together in 2024 might unveil the inevitable changes that age and life bring. And while the spotlight shifted, Richie found something far more lasting offstage. Legacy through a new lens. In the years since his departure from Bon Jovi, Richie Sambora has gradually reshaped his identity, not just as a guitarist, but as a father, solo artist, and man committed to healing. In his 2024 interviews with Yahoo Entertainment and the New York Post, Sambora spoke openly about going through therapy, reflecting on past decisions, and finding peace outside the whirlwind of rock stardom. He admitted to past mistakes, including the way he left the band, but emphasized that those decisions were part of a larger journey towards self-preservation. For Sambora, stepping away wasn't just an exit from a band, it was an intentional move toward rediscovering who he was beyond the stage. Much of his focus now is on family, particularly his daughter Ava, whose modeling and acting career has begun to blossom. Sambora has often expressed how proud he is of her and how his decision to leave Bon Jovi was heavily influenced by a desire to be a present father. He's also quietly continued his solo work, occasionally performing at charity events and teasing unreleased music. While he's no longer filling stadiums on a nightly basis, his creative spirit remains alive, and it's channeled into projects that bring him joy on a personal level, rather than pressure from global expectations. Sambora, while regretting how things ended with Bon Jovi, maintains a sense of pride in the music they made together. He often speaks of the historic run they had, how their songs changed lives, and the legacy they created together. More recent interviews indicate that while the two have gone their separate ways, Sambora still holds fondness for the band and Jon Bon Jovi. "We built something amazing," he pondered, "that history can never be taken away." The truthfulness and humility of Sambora have been a fitting background to his legacy, endearing him even further to fans who have been with him since the very beginning. To many, Richie Sambora remains the emotional and musical counterpart to Jon Bon Jovi, the bluesy soul behind the band's bombastic energy. His harmonies, songwriting, and guitar work helped define an era, and while he may have exited without a proper goodbye, his influence is felt in every note on the band's biggest hits. He's ghosted, maybe, but certainly not forgotten. Sambora's evolution shows that legacies aren't just what you do at your prime. They're also what you do with your life when the limelight fades. Sambora's post-Bon Jovi paths lay alongside a historical transition among legacy rockers who have started to assess the meaning of success in a much more human way, more philosophically. Sambora, like Dave Grohl stepping into mentorship or Bruce Springsteen going into memoir and Broadway, has chosen to embrace raw authenticity instead of mere spectacle. In an interview in 2024, he said he had been inspired by musicians such as Eric Clapton and Bonnie Raitt, who discovered deeper meaning in quieter moments in their careers. It's not about being loud anymore. It's about being real. This assertion enabled him to take back control of his story and resonate with a generation of followers who sought emotional truth rather than sold-out venues. His evolution is not about the riffs and the radio hits anymore. It's about strength, reinvention, and the courage to grow up on his terms. If you found this story as eye-opening as we did, make sure to like the video, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more untold truths from the world of rock. Got a favorite Bon Jovi memory or Richie solo moment? We want to hear it. And don't go anywhere. Click the next video on your screen to keep the music and the stories going.